All right. Welcome, Caitlin Thompson. Thank you so much for being with me. For the listeners, Caitlin Thompson is one of the foremost combo experts in my opinion and experience in the world, and is doing a ton of tremendous work in this space around education and training and everything in between. So I'd love for you to introduce yourself, and just thanks for being with me.
Thank you so much for having me. Always honored to be able to talk and share my experience, my passion for combos. So, yeah, I feel very honored to be invited as a guest. So, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. We could talk for hours, and I'm just gonna dive in. I'm curious, how does one become uh, the Caitlin Thompson today, who is so passionate and so really multidimensional in your expertise and really specifically with combo, but I imagine it spans more domains. But yeah, just curious to hear a little bit about your backstory and how you got here.
Yeah, well, like any unique human being on this planet, we're always a perfect storm that somehow molds us into the gift that we are. And that goes for everybody. But yeah, how did I get here? It's a question I ask myself fairly often, um, when I look at my life and I'm like, could not have predicted that 10 years ago or 20 years ago or when I was a kid and wanted to be a veterinarian or whatever. So my path, in general, my path seems to always fall a bit of an unconventional curve through things. That's kind of my flavor. So the way that I came into this work and to the place that I'm at now was, I would say, primarily through curiosity and intuition originally. Um, my background, I come from a history of chronic illness. I think that's honestly been the main driving force of a lot of things in my life, including studying science and health and nutrition and biochemistry, and ultimately what led me to seeking out tools for relief and for expanding, not only my consciousness and my sense of self and direction in the world, but also my capacity for vitality so that I could be more effective as a contributing member of society. So yeah, with a history of lupus, Lyme disease, PTSD, food allergies, mast cell activation, SIBO, ankylosing spondylitis, like, a bunch of labels basically that ultimately mean that my immune system was highly dysfunctional, and toxic and not working optimally. And it was affecting me in really substantial ways. I had a lot of chronic fatigue, pain, depression, anxiety, food sensitivities, and things like that. And Kambo kind of came into my life at a very interesting influx point where I was just starting to kind of come to terms with the reality that my health symptoms that I was essentially born with and then kind of exacerbated as I aged into my college years were not normal. And this is really common with these kind of invisible health conditions, is that they get disregarded a lot because the labs, don't always indicate that there's something clearly wrong with someone. And so these populations tend to get gaslit and dismissed by medical providers often. So I was kind of in that boat, but I always knew in my heart that something wasn't right. It wasn't normal for a young 20-something-year-old person to sleep 13 hours a day and literally just wake up thinking about the next time they'll get to sleep again and surviving until that moment. So Kambo kind of came into my life right as I was starting to experiment with some interventions and dietary changes and supplements and things like that. And figuring out that, like, oh no, there's something here. There is more room for vitality. And at first when I approached Kambo, I've always been a pretty big psychonaut and curious and exploring virtually anything. And I think that's initially what drew me to it, right? Like something weird. I want to try it. Why not? But then my first experience was substantially impactful, surprisingly so. I had no expectations. This was at a time that no one really knew that much about Kambo. There wasn't really information about it on the internet or anything like that. So it was really the Cowboys era. And I had this experience that was surprisingly spiritual, and especially addressing the really psycho-emotional, psycho-spiritual aspects of coming to terms with my illness and understanding the poetic nature of autoimmunity and the fact that, your body is attacking itself, and the kind of meta awareness of that, and incongruence of our emotional components and spirituality and relationship to ourselves. And I continued to utilize Kambo, and over time, I was just dramatically exceeding a quality of life that I had never even thought was possible for myself. I mean, each session, I was literally raising my baseline more and more, and something just told me to keep at it. And I then started with the self-administration practice. And, there wasn't really practitioners around at this time. So you just had to kind of do it the Yahoo way, which I'm not endorsing that at all. We have the tools now to do things differently. But at the time, there wasn't really that much available. So I started self-administering. And then, of course, my roommate would be like, well, maybe I can do it with you. And I'm like, okay, I guess I can serve another person. And then it was like another friend. And then it was a friend of the friend. And then next thing I knew, I had strangers coming to me and I had no training whatsoever. And it was just exploding out of control where there was clearly a demand and there was this attraction that was happening where all these people were flocking to me, for this frog medicine. And at a certain point, after probably, gosh, like 100 administrations, which was probably too much, I was like, this is not going away. I need to be in integrity. I need to get adequate training so that I can really know that, I'm serving from a place of integrity and education and fullness. So I went and did that certification, and then it just exploded. It exploded in my life and never slowed down after that. It took over my life in the most beautiful way. Um, and yeah, I started to slowly kind of like develop these other branches and aspects of my expertise with Kambo. What started as me just being a very prolific practitioner, then evolved into me forging these indigenous relationships with certain communities in the Amazon, primarily in Peru, and then starting to actually get some traction in creating scientific literature that can contribute to the body or lack of body of work on the topic. And yeah, then I started teaching and training practitioners because I felt like the most impactful way was actually for me to influence the next generation of providers. And it's just been this like really beautiful whirlwind of building, and weaving things together to arrive to where I'm at today, where I have the blessing and the privilege to be able to take all these diverse facets of Kambo and integrate them and marry them in a way that I'm able to share information and perspective and leadership that is truly integrated, well-rounded, and has perspective from multiple angles to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. So I just said a lot of words, so I'll pause there.
I agree. I agree. For those, I mean, there's so many different. What are some of the primary vehicles available on the internet for people to find your work? I'm one of which I just got done reading either for the first time or revisited. There's a fantastic 2022 publication on PubMed that Caitlin wrote with one of your co-authors. Very scientific for the biochemistry nerds out there. And so you can find that kind of work in PubMed, and then ranging from what other platforms as well.
Yeah, I mean, I have a few different websites. It kind of depends on what you're looking for, right? I have my Medicine Frog Kambo website, which is my practitioner site for people that want to actually, be served by me. And then I have a Kambo specialist, which is really our education site. That's where we have information about practitioner training, online courses for both, practitioners and the public, or people that want to create like a self-administration relationship, or they just want to learn about peptides in a video format, or they want to learn about the history. We have so many different categories of online courses there. And then, yeah, I have my publications. So far I have two publications out in Kambo related papers, and I'm on the verge of a third. We're just finalizing the revision review requests from the journal, which is awesome. That means that we're basically in. We just have to clean up a few things. And that's going to be the first of hopefully many papers of a 5-year long, 6-year long journey of the world's very first prospective human Kambo study. So we're really excited about that coming out. So in the next few months, hopefully that's available. And there's so many podcasts out there. There's a lot of content, honestly. And so, yeah, the whole point is to empower people with educational resources and reference so that we can foster more discernment in the community, because, Kambo, from a certain perspective, is still very much in its infancy in the West. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. And we're also still learning about, kind of how to relate to it within the context of Western culture, because, it's not the same to just take it in the jungle when you're an Amazonian person with a completely different, physiology and cultural context. And so, yeah, it's important that we learn and adapt and share information and acknowledge what we don't know as well, because there's far more that we don't know than what we do know. But it's important we work together as a community to share and exchange information in a way that's humble, open, honest, and scientifically literate, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, congratulations on that. That's amazing. Um, I want to define combo just very briefly for anybody who has gotten to this point and is like curious. They're like, all right, cool. What are you guys talking about?
Yeah.
And then I want to go back to some things that you brought up, but we can start there and work our way back.
Yeah, sorry, I went 0 to 60, but if you made it this far,
I usually get to the end and then I'm like, so introduce yourself. So this is, we're actually making progress.
yeah, you're either on the bus or you're off the bus. So
Yeah.
hopefully, if they're with us, they're with us. Yeah. So the elevator pitch on what is Kambo. So Kambo is an Amazonian ritual that was used by a number of different tribes of the Amazon basin area, and it involves the application of the secretion, the skin secretion of a very specific species of tree frog called Phylomedusa bicolor. And in this secretion, there are a number of bioactive peptide molecules that interact with human physiology in a really unique way. So this is applied typically through burns, superficial burns made on the skin. They're kind of like these little blisters that gives access to the lymphatic system. The secretion is applied to those burns and then rapidly taken up into the body, where it has a number of really potent biological effects that include things like elevated heart rate, changes in blood pressure and vasodilation, contraction, etc., smooth muscle contraction, gastric juice secretion, bile secretion. So that looks like nausea, sweating, vomiting, dizziness, all sorts of really fun experiences. So it's not necessarily pleasant. It can have its moments of bliss if you really are good at anchoring your perspective in that way. But I would say, objectively speaking, it's quite uncomfortable for most people. And to be clear, this is not a hallucinogenic substance. I think that's one of the most common misconceptions around Kambo is it gets kind of lumped into these categories with bufo, which is, of course, a toad that contains 5-MeO-DMT, which is a very potent psychoactive substance. But Kambo is not psychedelic in that traditional sense. There are some nervous system interactions with some of the peptides, and some of them do have opiate qualities to them. But it's very distinct from like a psychedelic or hallucinogenic aspect of other substances. And the cool thing is it lasts about 20 to 30 minutes. So it's short and sweet, or just short, depending on how you feel. And it's really the after effects that I think give people the motivation to do Kambo. So yeah, in that acute phase, there's a lot of discomfort. There can be, vomiting, diarrhea, people can faint, etc. Stomach cramping, sweating, heart rate, whatever. But afterwards, there is this amazing recalibration feeling, this sense of clarity and expansiveness and alignment, and often relief for a lot of symptoms of different diseases and health conditions that people are suffering from, just anecdotally reported, of course. So that's really why people do it. It's like you kind of put in your investment of your time and your energy and your pain for these really amazing results that I think are often unrivaled by other interventions. And that's why people come to Kambo, because even though it's a bit crazy on the outside, it works quite well. And anecdotally, there's just a tremendous amount of evidence from community members that it works. And I think that's ultimately why people are attracted to it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great definition. Thanks. Um, the word anecdotally is, I've been paying attention to it more because in so many ways in classic scientific literature, it's like anecdotally is kind of dismissed. It's like a term or terminology that's like, oh, this is a dismiss. This isn't like good quality evidence. But as you work in more in understudied fields, there's what anecdotally really means is that it's a clinician and practitioner experience, and the direct like reporting of patients, clients, people, human beings that go through a process that don't always find their way into a randomized control trial, even if we'd like it to. And that there's that anecdotal evidence is quite substantial and growing, and we're going to see more more evidence of all different kinds. But I appreciate the definition to get us grounded. I share your interest and passion as somebody who came to this also a whole healing journey and a lot of life through the lens of chronic illness. In addition to having all my interests and okay, I'm developing as a clinician, or I have an MD, I'm going in this doctor like path, is largely chronic illness that drove me into the worlds of psychedelic medicine, the worlds of indigenous medicine, looking for personal answers, not necessarily relief, but root under cause symptoms, right? And so I'm really curious to hear and kind of tease apart some of your trajectory, the healing trajectory that you experienced, and then I have more questions for kind of some models and concepts of chronic illness healing generally. But it's a shared interest and passion of mine.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to share more. Obviously my journey is my journey, but in working with a lot of people, I have really come to identify a lot of similar threads in people that are afflicted by certain chronic conditions. And I think one of the key discoveries that I've made in this work, that I prioritize really sharing with my clients and also my students, is to not dismiss the importance and the impact of the nervous system in dictating the state of your physiology. And the reason I say that instead of just saying emotions, because I think when I use the term the nervous system, it helps people understand more of the mechanistic connection between the body and the mind. The nervous system really is where that interface happens. It clearly is part of mediating the experience of um, being emotional and having feelings and being a conscious human being. But there's still a hardware to it, right? That people can view from a reductionist perspective if that's what they need to like make something make sense to them. I think a lot of people intuitively know that feelings and trauma affect how we feel and our health. Like there's clearly a connection there, but sometimes I think that's disregarded as like a very woo or abstract kind of spiritual unsubstantiated theory, and that's just furthest from the truth. Like there's actually a ton of literature, there's a ton of really concrete information about how things like stress and thought influence physiology. I mean, just look at the placebo effect for start, right? It's the most studied intervention in all of medical research, period. And it's so effective, it's so consistent that we have to design all of our studies around this really annoying phenomena that happens when consciousness makes a decision to engage in a demonstration of a desire to heal, taking the pill, going through the mock surgery or the mock injection or whatever it may be, that there's a tangible, physical, measurable, objective response that gets in the way of evaluating these other interventions. And I'm like, wait a second, like, why doesn't anyone ask, like, how do we harness that? Whatever the hell that force is, that's what we need to be studying, right? It is how consciousness and intentionality creates real measurable outcome in our bodies. So we know that consciousness affects our bodies. So yeah, and just from a mechanistic perspective, this has all been mapped out. When you have a nervous system that is in a chronic stress response, for example, there are certain neurotransmitters that are facilitating these neurological states of contraction. That's going to go through the vagal nerve and innervate all these other organs and all these processes around maintaining physiological homeostasis. There's going to be changes in digestive function. There's going to be changes in immune function. There's going to be changes in inflammatory processes because, stress is a good example. It's like when you perceive that there's a threat, that a lion is about to eat you, you shut off the non-essential aspects of your day-to-day bodily processing, like digestion and nutrient extraction, like fighting infections, reproduction, making babies or being fertile. That stuff is not important when you have a 30-second window to run for your life, right? What is important is how fast can you nourish your muscles with glucose and have those contractions help you sprint away from the threat. How effectively can your heart and lungs pump oxygen to those muscles to help you get away. All that stuff, right? That is the flight or fight response. So I use this example because I think it's the easiest for people to understand how something that is a perceptual experience of stress, of threat, has real tangible effects on our physiology. And so when we're stuck in these dysfunctional stress responses for chronic times, which is not what we're biologically adapted to, we have these long-term effects of immune suppression, of slowing of digestive capabilities, and secretion of gastric juices to actually extract nutrients. And then you have more and more nutritional deficiencies. And then you start creating this like snowball effect of depletion, of inflammation, of oxidative stress, of being unresourced to keep all the other machinery moving effectively. And this is kind of like the trajectory that many people with chronic illness arrive at. And I would say that most of the time, the consistent thing that I see is that there is a psycho-emotional, psycho-spiritual component to the illness. Another thing that I want to say on that, because I kind of just like explained the physiological cascade and how that manifests as a physical experience. I've also seen that, in order to resolve chronic illness and these complex disease states, you can't just treat the body. You have to go back to where the core dysfunction is, and that is the nervous system, that is the emotional body, and this complex consciousness making machinery that we have. And so if people do not take accountability and responsibility for the importance of that part of the work, they will not get better. When I see people show up even to do Kambo, they want the Kambo to fix them. They're treating it as another external tool where they disempower themselves and delegate their healing capacity to something outside of themselves. They do not get better. And so Kambo is a tool, essentially, that invites us to take responsibility for our process, for how we, perpetuate our realities that allow us to stay imprisoned to our pain and our disease, and to realize that we actually have a lot more agency than we may have thought, and that restoration of power is 100% crucial for people to break out of chronic illness, because ultimately I think chronic illness is an expression of, kind of learned helplessness or a disempowered state. And the body then creates a scenario to get the attention of the person and say, I need you to take care of me. I need you to have boundaries. I need you to prioritize nourishing me. And it will get louder and louder until the person gets the message and substantially changes their life and how they move through the world, through their psychology, through their social interactions, through their perspective, and through their nervous system regulation. So yes, I'll take a breath there.
Yeah. Yeah. How, in the times where you're in darker, rough times with chronic illness, where, both in reflection from where you are now, but then also where you began learning and interacting and healing with the frog, with your process, with yourself, with your brain, with your mind, where did you identify those places where you were able to be like, oh, I'm perpetuating this? What were you engaging with in terms of your relationship with yourself or others or the world that was perpetuating that you began to learn about in the Kambo process?
Yeah, I think Kambo was kind of one of the biggest mirrors for me to understand that. In that very first session, the message that I got, which was not necessarily what I was looking for, was that I was harboring a foreign energy that was ancestral, and wasn't mine. And because of that, my body, or my energetic body, was trying to attack it, because they could feel that there was an incongruence, that it didn't belong to the self, and yet I was harboring it in myself. And that kind of really led me into contemplating, more of like looking at my childhood and attachment and safety and the way that had affected my nervous system and sense of feeling secure. So I don't know that I would have been supported quite as much by these other modalities. But Kambo really illuminated that for me. And it also gave my physiology the spaciousness to be able to process and confront these concepts and ideas in a way that I felt resourced enough to do so. It's like that's another thing is like if somebody's body is in a wreck, the psyche will actually suppress um, the access to these thoughts and feelings because it takes energy and resilience to be able to bring those things up and process them. And if you're just like massively inflamed and depleted, your body will be like, nah, you ain't ready. So
Yeah,
something like
the red zone sucks.
yeah, yeah, totally. So yeah, I think for me, Kambo was a very influential tool in that way, but also just like, people have to be willing to ask questions and be honest with themselves because you can do all the Kambo you want, but if you're not ready to really explore the deeper, darker aspects of your psyche and willing to challenge your stories, and consider that maybe you have created your own pain in certain ways, you just won't get anywhere. So that is a fundamental piece as well. Um, as far as like my journey, um, I think, it's really easy to get into the learned helplessness. And I think that is a nervous system state that is more implicated in health conditions than people realize. And as someone who's been on kind of both sides of the victim story, I could see how, from my experience, and other people's too, I'm sure, um, when you feel that you have been dealt a hand that wasn't fair, and it's not for most people. In a lot of cases, you are a victim, right? Somebody mishandled you or didn't create safety and security for you, and that wasn't your fault, right? But then you learn that you have no power over your own life. And so you start to generate a reality where that feels true. And therefore you don't try and you don't believe that you can change your reality because you are subscribed to a narrative where you're the victim and you don't have the power. Um, and when you find your way on the other side of that, which I wish I could tell you what the instant answer is, but I think it's more
There's
that you,
none. There's no instant answer.
yeah, it's going to be a different process for each person, right? But if you're lucky enough and you have that breakthrough that you're able to ask yourself those questions and explore different ways of viewing reality, then eventually you hopefully find yourself on the other side when you're like, I have a lot more control over things than I thought. And I get to choose how I respond to everything in life. You don't always get to choose what happens to you in life, but you always get to choose how you respond. Um, and having been on the other side, crested that to a place that felt more empowered and more accountable, um, I could then see really clearly the people that I'm working with that are still stuck in this victim response and the learned helplessness, and how that it's like this heavy dark kind of blanket that they're stuck in, and they can't, it's so hard to see it when you're in it feels like you have blinders on, and even though you're so close to what you need, it's just one step away. You just sometimes cannot fathom in those moments what you need, and that's why I think having a guide who has a personal experience in their healing journey and has actually gained real wisdom that they can share that with people in a way that is effective and received well in a supportive delivery. That's so invaluable, and that's why we need people serving this medicine that have really walked the walk, that really can speak from experience of excavating their own shadows, that they can then guide other people to do that as well.
Mm, well said. Yeah, my there's a there's a growing field which I imagine you're aware of, and maybe intimately involved with in some capacities, or not know some of this, but there's a big growing field around nervous system medicine, right? Which is, as I've understood it, because I kind of kickstarted in psychedelic therapy models before I started learning more about just kind of standard Western clinical models of treatment or really anything else. And excuse me. Um, as I started to explore my own healing, and then also from what I had access to from like physicians that were kind of Western trained, very allopathic, very white coat doctory. There's this whole field of, what is the word psychosomatic medicine is like there's stigma because there's psycho in there, and people think that it's like, oh, you're doing this to yourself. And there's been a lot of, history and loadedness around that term broadly.
Mm-hmm.
But it was born largely out of this need and this realization amongst not many, but a few Western physicians, who started to really kind of see that just in their basic practice, right? Okay, there is not only a mind body connection, but there are, if we can work with psychology and, the emotional body, spirituality, whatever, in a targeted way, it actually, like, that is what is going to resolve the physical manifestations. And so I've kind of watched and have at times been very deeply a part of, this growing psychosomatic field of medicine. And a lot of it seems to really, it is very, how do I describe it? I guess in its extreme sense, or its purest sense, there's a message that comes through, which is like, this is pure psychology and emotional, and there's no, like, really should do away with anything physical intervention wise, because it's so, a lot of people are conditioned to just, again, kind of go into I'm used to getting my arm checked out, and, I get the treatment, and that's just, that's how it is. I give all the power to the doctor in it. And so it's just such a habit to be in that process of giving your power away to treatment providers and being stuck in a reductionist biomechanical model of thinking. But, it's, a lot of people get a lot of really good results, and they find that they're able to resolve their symptoms with, just working in their psyche and just on the nervous system level. But I also see a lot of people that are really stuck there, and it's been a long time, really probably more a logical and philosophical conundrum to see, like, oh, I see these being married. It's like, okay, Kambo is a physical medicine. It is very physical. Yes, it acts on multiple domains, but it is physical. It is, like, deeply biological in that capacity too. And so it stumps me at times to see the, like, wow, okay, there is this acting on the psychology and in the emotional body, but it's also, like, coming from a physical substance, a physical matter. And I'm curious around your, like, I don't know, your experience or your ability to kind of bridge these worlds in a way that feels coherent and settled for you, instead of having them just be, like, totally separate.
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess first I just want to share like a bit of an analogy that I like to use when I'm kind of describing what may be required to recover from a chronic illness. And like you said, like there's clearly this psychosomatic elements, but often that can be used in a way that feels dismissive to imply that the physiological suffering is not real. And that's just not true. It means that the origins may come from psychology and the nervous system and stress experiences, but the tangible effects are very real for people and their suffering is real. And so I imagine, like, if you have a bathroom and you turn on the sink, say that's like the initial core trauma. That's the alcoholic dad that was never there, or the abusive mother, or weird babysitter, or whatever. That turns the faucet on, and eventually over time, the sink will overflow and it'll start flooding the bathroom. Now, in order to solve this problem, there's two things that need to happen. One, turn off the freaking sink, right? So that's the equivalent of addressing the fact that the faucet is on and creating this problem. But even if you do all this psychological work and you turn off the faucet, there's no longer water coming out and filling your bathroom. Now you have a bunch of water in the floor of your bathroom. It's gonna rot your walls and your floor and your tiles and your rugs and cause problems, right? So this mess still has to be cleaned up. And so the mopping, or getting all this water out and drying everything out, this is the equivalent of nurturing and resourcing the physical body and addressing the physical symptoms that have manifested. And the truth is, if you have this happen to your bathroom, you want both of these things being done, right? You're not just going to choose one or the other. And so I think it is really foundational that people understand that those things have to happen simultaneously. You have to address and resource the physical aspects of how this has manifested in the body, while also working towards resolving the kind of nervous system state and the energetic charge of whatever unresolved thing that needs to be processed. And like I mentioned, the psyche will moderate how much access you have to these deeper feelings and memories and things like that, according to how resourced the body is. So I see the process essentially like a zipper, where it's like you have to kind of do one step at a time and calibrate your way up into wholeness. You can't move too fast on the psychological end because the body won't be able to support all of that. It won't be regulated enough. And you also can't just have the pristine diet and all the supplements and all the IVs and everything else if you're not doing the deeper psychological work, because the nervous system is what set the pattern. And as long as the maladaptive pattern transmission is still being omitted, even if you do all these things right, the results, like the body is going to just keep moving back into the maladaptive state of homeostasis, which is imbalance for you. So I just wanted to kind of like address that as a concept, is like it has to be this slow weaving process where you're inching, on each side of the equation and working together holistically. Now, your other question, which I'm trying to remember and I'm blinking on, why did I even share that?
It's a great analogy. It's a great analogy, and it speaks to this, this point of there being many different camps and pathways of healing. There's so many tools, so many modalities, and sometimes they can be very in one domain. Like we'll work purely on the relational level, then somebody's like, well, you got to hit. It's like, no, just the work level, just the career level. It's like you can nail it out there in your purpose. So they can be distinct sometimes. So
yeah, and I'm remembering now what the point of me sharing all that was. So how does Kambo fit into that as a substance that is clearly potently interfacing with our physiology, but also in this strange way our spirit and our mind? And I think the reality is that every substance, every chemical in this universe is already interacting with biology to facilitate some sort of communication with our spirits, right? With our consciousness, our souls, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of ways you could look at it, but I already see biology and receptors and proteins as the mechanical hardware for spirit to interact with itself on this planet and probably others. Um, and, we look at things like psychedelics, which clearly can facilitate potent spiritual experiences for people. And at the end of the day, they're also molecules. So I feel that Kambo, you know, really, really kind of goes into like the physiological aspects of how the body has the capacity to hold these other layers of consciousness and emotionality or psychology, etc. And like I said, if the body is not resourced, the psyche will not allow access to these deeper feelings and the flow of them and the awareness of them. And so I feel like Kambo kind of like hits these buttons, these, receptor binding activity happens, and it almost like manually overrides whatever the downstream kind of programming was, and it allows this like control alt delete kind of equivalent where you can just reset all these programs that have been kind of warped or distorted in certain ways based on events in your physiology. And then in that, you have actually this like spaciousness that gets created where new feedback mechanisms can be stimulated. You can kind of like reorient, recalibrate all these intelligent processes that are already built into the design of your brilliance, but that can just kind of get stuck in these loops in our biology. And whether that stays that way, I think is up to us. And so that few days after a Kambo experience is really critical because that's when we, I think, have the most influence on our adaptability of like what new systems get implemented and what new programs and patterns we are going to nurture because we get kind of a clean slate where we get to reset our biology and then thus our psychology and our emotionality and spirituality.
It's amazing to have yeah, I feel lucky to have a biological bottom up ally that also is working at such like a deep level with the mind and brain, and then and I feel like it also speaks to, she said it, at first, and we both share this, of having an experienced practitioner who can like actually offer those tools too, or some of them at least, something for you to work with instead of it can be so easy to just be in that reductionistic model paradigm. Here, there you go. There's Kumble. Bye. Good luck. And it's there. It sounds like there's a lot of fruit to be gathered after such an experience like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, there's a lot of people that operate that way with how they serve Kambo. There's nothing wrong with that, but I feel that, yeah, it's like a real missed opportunity to get much deeper results with a lot more mindfulness and intentionality. And this is kind of the argument I make around not being dogmatic with traditional methodology, because as you probably have experienced, it's very casual in the jungle. The Kambo experience often, there's no real shamanic lineage with Kambo. It's very practical. It's just something you do when you need it. And there's not a lot of fluff, right? And so there's been this neo shamanic adaptation that has occurred over the last 20, 30 years, essentially, in the West, as this medicine has been used in places like the US and Europe and things like that. And some people, they don't like that it has diverted from traditional methods and perspectives. But the truth is, I think that it's important to adapt a tool to the context in an appropriate way. And whether people like it or not, Kambo has left the jungle. And I do believe it has its own agency and its own agenda to do that. So who are we to interfere in that? And I think, yeah, if people are going to be using it outside of its natural context, then we need to be discerning about how we support its evolution in being innovated in that way, so that it makes sense, so that it's safe, so that it's useful, so that it's supportive to actually accomplishing something that contributes something good to the world.
Hmm. And to different parts of the world that, like you shared, have very different cultures, contexts, illnesses, the different kinds of struggles that people are dealing with. Very, very different challenges experienced down in the jungle compared to, what a modern day human in Alabama is working with. That's from everything from the psychology to the spirit to the relational web of where they are to the environment to everything that's going in their body coming out, everything they're exposed to is such vastly different. You had I saw a post, maybe it was today another day that you wrote. It was like the hunt for purpose. I'd love for you to elaborate on that a little bit because I think it speaks to both this soulful and psychological terrain that we're traversing, but then also um the indigenous origins of it, what is actually used for hunting.
Yeah, I mean, this is primarily what Kambo was used for, was a hunting aid. It enhanced their visual acuity and their perceptual abilities, their endurance, and luck as they felt. And there wasn't really a lot of medicinal use of Kambo. They did, here and there use it for that, and they
Okay.
certainly were not using it for their childhood wounds. Like that, I don't think that's something they even think about or consider.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, so it's like clearly the application use has changed as Kambo is now being used for aligning your chakras and clearing your energy and resolving your traumas and lifting your depression and all this stuff, which it's incredibly useful for. It's great. But that isn't traditionally how it was used for. And so in some ways it's evolving as an entirely new medicine and intervention and modality, which some people don't like, and that's okay. Um, but yeah, I think just kind of looking at the core energy and properties of what the medicine really brings into our lives and being able to translate them in a cultural context to understanding how these attributes can be applied to different cultural contexts, different time, in history. And so we might not be in the Amazon hunting monkeys and tapirs and stuff to eat for dinner, which we rely on to survive. But we are still humans and we still have hunting instincts and we still have dopaminergic systems which motivate us to seek out certain resources or experiences or novelty or security in our lives. And so, yeah, in the Amazon, they're hunting animals to eat to sustain themselves. We might be hunting purpose. We might be hunting a partner. We might be hunting a career. We might be hunting a hobby that feels like our passion. We might be hunting, just feeling whole in ourselves. So I think knowing the traditional context of how Kambo is used, even though that might not still apply, we can still kind of really look at the core pieces of what that medicine can bring to people's lives, the properties of it, and then translate that in a way that is contextually relevant for where we're at in our lives in this moment of time and history.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Um, I'm curious to maybe explore some idiosyncrasies around combo. Um, One being the immune system, and maybe this is a little bit like myth versus fact. And then we also just there's a lot that we don't know. But in combo has effects on the immune system. We know this, and I'm curious, from when it's applied. to the skin, this exposes the lymphatic system, the capillary system, all of the blood vessels, the nerves, et cetera, that are under the epithelial layer of the skin. And there's a lot of I've heard, I think originally when I first started receiving combo, it's like this is a lymphatic medicine. It's going in the lymphatic, and lymphatic for people, it's like correlated with immune, with lymph immune system. And I've struggled to understand how I'd have to imagine that it circulates more through the venous and like the venous system and through the oh gosh, the arteries and the arterials, and because the lymph is so slow to move unless it's propelled by muscle. For those who don't know, it's much more of a passive system. Curious as to your insight and learning on that.
Yeah, I've asked these same questions because, again, there's just these ideas that circulate that no one ever seems to question or critically think about. And, I'm not a medical doctor, but I did take some time to try and understand the lymphatic system to conceptually like be able to piece together like how does the peptide get from the burn to the tissue where it's binding and having some sort of effect. And it seemed obvious at a certain point that, like, of course it's going into the bloodstream. Like, how else is it freaking circulate? Like, how do you feel your heartbeat within 40 seconds of that being put on your boo boo? So I imagine that, like, the lymphatic system, from what I understand, is somewhat selective about what it'll take up, right? Because it's supposed to like clean all the gross shit from the blood and then take in what is essential to recycle into circulation again. And it appears that these peptides are being accepted into the club, and they're being taken up into the vasculature itself in a way. But we also like don't have any clue, like, are some of them not taken up? Are some facilitating the absorption of other peptides? And so we also can't assume that just what's in the secretion is necessarily what is entering the body. And, there's all of these peptides are susceptible to trypsin degradation. So there's proteases in all of your, fluid and cells that rapidly degrade these peptides. So again, the question is like, by the time something is reaching its receptor target, is it even still that molecule, or is it already a metabolite that has turned into something else? And a good example of that is like psilocybin and psilocin. At the end of the day, the psilocin's what gets you high. The psilocybin is just like the buffered version that you have to convert. But yet everyone talks about psilocybin as being the substance. So there's still so much unknown about like the pharmacology of Kambo, and the kind of kinetics of how it moves in a living system. But yeah, I would say that, like, given my rudimentary understanding of the lymphatic system, it's definitely getting into the blood system, because how else would it be reaching the brain, the gut, the heart, like all the
Every
organ
single
systems?
capillary.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's clearly widespread. You can feel it. Like, you put it on your ankle, yeah, maybe it takes a little bit longer there than you put it on your chest, but it gets in there and it is systemic no matter where you apply it.
Yeah. Yeah. Do we have any idea how long the peptides or metabolites might stay in the system for? I think there's definitely some rapid degradation, and like I don't know, I'm not gonna say all cells, but most cells do have some kind of proteases. They have trypsin, they have chymotrypsin, but a lot of that, I mean, for probably in good luck for us, is a lot of that, at least in the GI system, is dedicated to the bowel lumen. So lumen meaning, for people who don't know, the inside. That's where your food lives. And so a lot of the secretions that go into the intestines, into the stomach, are meant to start breaking down whatever you put into your mouth. And so, because Kambo's not swallowed, I'd have to imagine it's a little bit protected from some of the gastric breakdown. But yeah, I wonder. Yeah, is there any kind of sense of, do we know at all? for how long?
Yeah, there is some sort of pharmacological exploration on, the sort of initially described peptides. And I have looked into it. I couldn't kind of quote you exactly, but as I recall, most of the peptides had, half-lives anywhere between 2 minutes and 3 hours. So all of them were pretty rapidly degraded. Kambo's peptides are very linear compared to other animal toxin peptides. So typically when you're looking at like cone snail or spider or snake venoms, they're very aromatic, meaning you probably know what this means, but for anyone else that's listening, it means that like the core structure ends up kind of like forming a loop with itself, which makes them much more stable and harder for the body to degrade. And that's part of why those toxins and cause so much like cellular destruction if you get a snake bite or a brown recluse bite or anything like that. With Kambo and a lot of other frog-based peptides, they're kind of just like very linear. And so they just go like, they get crunched up and munched up really quickly. They don't last in the system very long. And I think that's part of what makes them so incredibly non-toxic and safe. Because even though they do have these really potent, pharmacological aspects to them, like they bind and then they produce these real dramatic effects, it doesn't persist, right? The peptides kind of come and they go real quickly. And so it makes it manageable for a body that has some level of resilience. And then ultimately seems to prompt perhaps a hermetic effect where then there's this opportunity for the body to respond to that challenge or disruption from that key and lock mechanism. And then it seems to recalibrate and kind of reinstate all these intelligent feedback systems to kind of like get them, back to a place where it's making sense.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I don't know, there maybe there's a question in here somewhere, but I had written down, this idea about homeostatic, the body's homeostasis. The body is like really natural regulatory rhythms. So like at every single moment of every single second, you're kept together by a absolutely mind-numbing amount of complex interrelationships between all these different organ systems, and they're able to keep you alive and largely healthy, even in a state of chronic despair or illness or whatever you're experiencing. Even at that time, most of your like regulatory systems are keeping you alive, and they're going. There's incredible intelligence beaming through us, and so we have these medicines that come in. The combo comes in, interacts, and then kind of dissolves away, right? And I hear a lot of people talk about this correction and this idea of working with the body, working with the vitality of the body, and it's like inherent intelligence versus other pharmacological interventions, or you could surgical interventions, whatever you want to call it, other external interventions that either force it or like aren't working with the body in some way. And it's interesting. I don't necessarily have a good biological explanation for it, because I was thinking about something like an SSRI, right? Peptides, for people don't, or maybe a little biochemistry. They're largely not going to pass through the cell wall. The cell wall is mostly hydrophobic. They're going to interact with receptors on the cell wall, which is how so many medicines, drugs, everything interacts with a lot of cells. There's hormones and other things often go through the cell, but there's not a ton that just like gain entry into the cell, into the club. But so they're acting with and they're transmuting their information, working with the body through external signaling. But so is an SSRI, and so are a lot of different kind of pharmaceutical interventions, right? And yeah, I don't know what makes them different. Maybe an essence, maybe a life force, but it's, those are something that we take every day, and that it's almost this sense of overriding and correcting, saying, okay, the system is broken, doesn't know how to work itself. So we're going to adjust it to this new, this thermostat. We're going to change the thermostat to 77 from 43. and certainly can be beneficial for people, but it's a very different, combo. For people that don't know, this is not something that you take every day for months or years. And this is it's very interesting that where does that kind of, how do you think about those in terms of the homeostasis, in terms of the inherent intelligence and its capacity to work with us?
I think that's an excellent question. That's invites a lot of deep reflection, like ultimately, why is it that some tools are more effective than others, right? And is it that some have more intelligence or of a spirit to them, etc.? And just based on kind of my spiritual perspective of reality, I do believe that all of matter is conscious to some extent. And I believe that there's a phenomena that happens where the more increasingly complex a conglomerate of molecules is, the more emergent properties of self-awareness or consciousness it can harbor. And I, there's evidence of that just kind of in like quantum physics or just regular physics. Like there's energetic thresholds that can then create valences for new properties to emerge. And so, I feel like every molecule is alive and conscious in its own right, but some are arranged in much more complex and intricate ways with each other than others are. So when I look at like a pharmaceutical molecule is generally a single substance, right? And yeah, I do think it carries some sort of a consciousness, and you can use these molecules to be really targeted in applying to a specific receptor or system that you believe is central for stimulating these more intelligent kind of feedback mechanisms. But then you look at something like Kambo that comes from nature. And I'm not saying that things that are natural are necessarily gonna be more intelligent or targeted or effective, because I don't believe in that dogma. But the thing about things that are developed in nature is that they have developed over millions of years of evolution, of coevolution, and of interconnectedness with other biological organisms that share similar systems. And so by that, they are inherently more complex, and they have evolved in a system where there's been a lot of feedback and regulatory adjustments based on an entire complex ecosystem. And I generally tend to trust that developmental process more because it's frankly more sophisticated, right? It's way more complex. It's way more detailed. It takes way more time to fine tune something to be that precise than it does for someone to create a single molecule pharmaceutical. So again, I don't want to state that I think one is better than the other, but typically, given that reality, I think that's why natural substances often operate more harmoniously with people's bodies. Because when you bring in a pharmaceutical, it's just pushing the button, and the body has to respond to that button being pushed and make all these adjustments. Whereas something like an apple, or a medicinal, a reishi mushroom or something like that, the body has already adapted and is familiar with how to integrate harmoniously with this type of organism and all the components of the organism. Like we've already adapted to digesting and processing certain materials in the plant that might be toxic in another context. And we've already created mechanisms to respond to that in a way that actually allows us to thrive. So it's all very interconnected already, and we are part of that coevolution, and therefore I think natural substances tend to just integrate more smoothly because there is this intimate co-evolution of these physiological pathways that have been refined over a long time. Um, so I guess, does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, it's fantastic. Um, it makes a lot of sense. And uh, yeah, I'm curious how this relates to the concept of energy. I don't think we're gonna in our conversation have some eureka about the nature of energy and consciousness. Maybe we will. But I'm curious how there's an combo is an intense energy. It is, for as much as there is there's all this biological, um, there's psychological like components to it. It's often felt as like, wow, I am perfused with a intent, something that is just a very intense energy. And it's immense, it's powerful, it's noticeable, it's strong. And I'm curious if you have uh, any useful ways of talking about energy in the context of combo that people benefit from in a way that's kind of grounded and pragmatic.
Mm, this is tricky because the term energy is so vague,
Very
right?
vague.
It means so many things, and I feel like it's a term that gets used to describe phenomena and aspects of the world that we can feel, but we have not yet defined or even have any clue how to differentiate. And there's probably so many fields of energetic exchange on the physical realm that we have yet to even quantify or define. So just my scientist brain goes there of like, I'm not going to be able to tell you what energy means. But yeah, I mean, I would say just like the spirit of combo. I feel like that's a term that maybe better describes what you're asking me, which is
Hmm.
like, yeah, the energetic signature of the phenomena of combo. Um, I think it's an incredibly potent substance. I feel like, just like in nature, some foods are more calorie rich than others, right? Like a coconut is an incredibly potent, condensed version of energy that exists, and that's why it's such a good food. And I think Kambo is kind of the equivalent of like a coconut, right? Like a fatty, like
Yeah.
dense and full of a lot. There's a lot there. Um, and yeah, Kambo is intense in a lot of ways, and I think it also can be used in ways that are less intense, but you can still feel the potency even when you dilute the experience. Like, for example, with a microdose, um, that's still kind of intense for a lot of people. And just subjectively, there's still a very real physical experience that you can have from that controlled subpurgative dose. Um, even even when you handle the frogs, when you touch the frogs and there's little bits of peptides, I mean, minuscule amounts of peptides going into your skin, or perhaps like aromatically going into your nose. I've had times where I'm like scraping off powdered Kambo into Eppendorf tubes for mass spec analysis, and I'm sneezing like crazy, and there is like a noticeable effect. Like you you feel some sort of actual physical change and perhaps energetic too, but like there's a tangible like, oh, I feel more alert, like I was feeling super groggy and tired, and suddenly I feel kind of stimulated and clear. Um, so yeah, that stuff is super potent and highly concentrated. And yeah, I think despite the outward violence that Kambo looks to have, I think it's one of the most benevolent substances that I've ever encountered. And I've encountered a lot of spirits out there, like I've explored a lot of different things, but it feels totally benevolent in a way that I haven't found that same energy from any other plant. Sometimes I feel that other plants have agendas. Sometimes I feel exploited. Sometimes I feel that they're having a temper tantrum and they're having like a flawed moment where they're jealous or upset or being petty. And I feel like Kambo is like a very high integrity, evolved being that truly wants good in the world and it has its own agenda, but wants to go about it in a way that is mutually supportive, and in integrous, collaboration with the people that it utilizes as allies.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a difficult game of vernacular to play, right? Intense, potent. Like I had this conversation recently with a friend. We are talking about the context of detox, the idea of detox in broadly across, culture and medicine and wellness, but then also with combo. And I was like, you can almost, you know, we could talk about detoxification for hours and hours and hours, but I was like, with at least what I've seen, both myself and other, when people are using it, often you can almost watch them like search for a word. They're trying to find a word that matches their experience. And detox ends up being one that they like land on. They're like, yeah, that resonates with something. And I don't know why, but it's like, okay, they're like, oh, there's a word search, and they find it, and then detox
Mm.
lands it on there. And then people that are high critics get very upset about the word detox and using it correctly. But I'm like, wow, just watch somebody's experience a little bit. Just they're trying to look for words. It's okay to use these words that, in a wordless space, in a space that we could never describe fully, and use our language to achieve.
Yeah, for sure. And doing anything with judgment is generally not the best way to do it. Um, I'm not a huge fan of the word detox because I feel like it's an unsophisticated explanation of what Kambo really is. But I don't hate it. I do think that there is probably some element of detoxification that's happening, but I see it more as like a core realignment. Um, and I think, yeah, it's much more sophisticated and complex than getting the bad out. Because that's also a concept that I think is oversimplified. People think that if you receive a vaccine and then you do Cambo, it's as if you never took a vaccine. And it's like, that's not how it works. Like, once something's introduced, the immune system responds. There's a memory, there's an interaction and a relationship that forms, and nothing will take that away. And yeah, if there's excipients or metals in that vaccine, then perhaps Cambo can help promote the healthy mechanisms that are already in place, working day in and day out without you even thinking about it, to help facilitate those things by keeping all the machinery nice and shiny. But ultimately, yeah, the body's not a bucket that you put something in and then Cambo takes it out. Um, it's not that simple. And so for me, it's less about shaming people about using certain words, but more inviting them to expand their vocabulary, and concept of how this medicine can operate in a really elegant and complex way that is not just like reduced down to something that is somewhat inaccurate in conception, in my opinion. So my goal is always to kind of just raise the awareness and access that people have to thinking about these things in more nuanced and deep ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Very well said. Um, yeah. How do you, I wanted to comment on your comment earlier about combo being a benign substance, and a benign, I mean, not a benign, a benevolent substance. And I
Also
thought to
benign.
myself, and benign. And I was like, yeah, and that's coming from a, somebody who wants to aspire to be a veterinarian, somebody who cares about animals and cares about, these beings. And yeah, it does look bizarre from the outside in, whether it's the handling of the combo, and the process, uh, but yeah, you've it's almost as if you've kind of maintained some of the pure spirit of the veterinarian in you too, and the care.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an animal lover through and through. I've been an equestrian most of my life and a pet owner, and yeah, I think that was my initial interest in medicine and healing was the desire to connect with animals and to care for them in that way. And in that sense, it doesn't surprise me that I've become a conduit for an animal medicine. And yeah, it can be controversial, like there's questions about ethics and sustainability, and the humane aspect of Kambo. And it requires deep reflection to look at those things as somebody who cares about animals. I also used to be vegetarian for 10 years, and those were the sickest years of my life. And now I'm not vegetarian. And it's not because I won't cuddle a chicken or a cow, but the fact is it's like you have to choose your battles and you have to nourish yourself in your existence and know that everybody is eating somebody else, and that's how it was designed. Um, and yeah, I think with Kambo, there's ways that we can ensure that it's being done that are ethical, that are minimizing distress and harm to the frogs. And yeah, again, choosing your battles, like the amount of let me just say that the amount of stress that I put myself through every day trying to run my Kambo business, right? Trying to put on conferences and make scientific studies happen and smashing my head against concrete walls is way more than what a frog experiences for 10 minutes to give up its secretion. So I think it's important to put things like that in perspective. It's like, I'm not going to say that the frog doesn't have to be distressed at all because that's required for it to secrete the substance. And I have seen when they're too relaxed, they're just like, eh. And then they don't do it because they're like so comfortable. So they do have to be kind of like terrorized a little bit, but it's like we're showing up and being willing to put ourselves through that same amount of discomfort in the actual acute Kambo experience. And so I feel that there's honor in that. There is an exchange that like I'm not here to exploit you. I'm here to also give my comfort. I'm here to also be in this momentary period of distress and suffering for the sake of transmuting something into something else. And that's why I trust Kambo, is because it's not too good to be true. It's not a free lunch. It's not like, some of these kind of miraculous things that you hear with psychedelics and people just kind of go crazy and they're like, psychedelics are the solution. Kambo sucks. It sucks and it requires real sacrifice, and it's hard and it hurts. And I mean, even I am just like, I know I need to do it soon, but like I don't really want to. Um, the thing is, that you can trust those gifts because they were not too good to be true. There's a lot of things in life where you're like, wow, this feels too easy. And then it ends up being not what it appeared to be. With Kambo, you can trust that you earned your gifts and there is no catch. And that's one of the things I love about it. It feels incredibly honest and transparent, and everything is just out in the open on the table. And it's no bullshit. It's not sugar coated. It's just balanced.
Yeah. Well, that's a great place to begin wrapping it up here. I'm super appreciative and also conscious of your time. I'm curious how the how's the general state of the frog ecosystem as we, here in July of 2026.
Yeah, it's important to address that. So Kambo has rapidly gained in popularity in the last 5 years or so. Like I've seen it basically exponentially grow. And I spent a lot of time on the ground in the jungle, going to the same communities year in, year out, and seeing the state of the frogs, seeing the kind of abundance of the frogs. And I am seeing changes on the ground. There are signs in certain areas of over harvesting. Frogs' health are looking compromised in certain areas. In certain parts, like you might catch seven frogs and three of them have secretion to give, which also indicates that they're, not having enough time to kind of regenerate their supply. So even though right now the population standing for Phylomedusa bicolor is, good, they're not threatened. Um, Given the interest in the harvesting practices of Kambo, especially on the kind of crests of some of these jungle areas, there's going to be areas where there's particularly heavy over harvesting happening because there's all sorts of frogs that are deep in the jungle that no one can get to, right? And their populations are fine. But it's the ones on the outskirts of like places like Iquitos or Pucallpa and things like that, that are the most vulnerable to being influenced. And so now is a really important time to start taking this seriously and to start creating protective parameters before it becomes a real problem. And so we need to act now, not later. And that's part of the work that, we do with our new nonprofit, the Institute of Kambo Advancement and Preservation. Part of our initiative is funding and creating conservation research that can really kind of measure what sustainability practices look like. And so that includes, doing kind of like baseline population metrics in certain areas to get some sort of understanding of what does a healthy population look like and how can that fluctuate with certain interventions. Eventually we would like to build some breeding pools in different indigenous communities so that the frogs are supported in prosperous breeding. We can also see how effective they are by having the baseline, population counts and continuing to monitor that on a yearly basis, for example. And so we can actually evaluate like if these things work, and then continue to implement them, which are also good for indigenous communities because they're looking for ways to resource themselves, and they're disadvantaged and they're in poverty, and so they might be more prone to over harvesting out of desperation if this is one of the only ways that they have to support themselves. So if we can allow them support in making sure that they can sustainably do that by supporting their frog populations in a way that's going to allow them to like reliably be able to produce, product for themselves without compromising the balance of the ecosystem. There's magnitudes of benefits for that, for the people, for the forest, for the frogs, for people in the West accessing Kambo as a precious, rare medicine. So that's just like a little snippet of, some of the work that we're pioneering in the space to make sure that we, can continue to have access to this really beautiful spirit.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, I'd like to just close out with anything you're particularly excited about coming up that just as a practitioner. So you've seen a lot over the years. Anything that actually is really you're looking forward to and excited right now that you'd like to share?
Yes, actually. So we have been working on a multi-year project that we just announced this week, and it is KamboCon 2027. It is the world's first international Kambo conference. It's been a bloody pain in the butt, I tell you that, but we're so excited because it's, this coalition of bringing indigenous voices and speakers from diverse backgrounds and practitioners, thought leaders, researchers, Kambo enthusiasts, really everybody in the space. We're bringing them together and creating this sort of container where we can dialogue, where we can learn from each other, and we can also kind of heal the wounds of the space. Not everybody may realize this, but the Kambo space is quite fractured, and there's a lot of political kind of like tribalism and stuff that is really disheartening and unproductive. And the goal of this conference is to really unite people in their shared passion for this medicine and talking about the hard things that we need to start talking about as community leaders. And that, that's things like ethics and cultural appropriation and sustainability and harm reduction practices and industry standards and research and all these things. So this conference is happening in San Diego, California, March 19th through 21st, 2027. So if you guys are interested, I would love to have you there. It's gonna be freaking awesome. We got a lot of awesome like satellite workshops and indigenous elders that I'm bringing in from Peru and Brazil, that will also, be sharing their cultural transmissions through Kambo. So yeah, I'm sure you can find a link on the show notes or whatever, or you can just go to cambocon.com.
Yeah, that is exciting.
Yeah, I hope that you'll join us.
Yeah, thank you for going through the pain and suffering to put it together.
You know, you're welcome, and I'm still deciding if it's worth it. So we'll see. When we're at the conference, I might feel like, okay, it was worth it. But right now, I'm in the
Maybe.
like the cry every day mode.
Maybe. It's sometimes just like far after. And you're like, all right, you have to attend to it during the middle of it too. This is also challenging.
Yeah, it's brutal, man. But I mean, yeah, I just I can see the vision, and I'm holding the prayer of what it could be and the impact of it. And yeah, I want you guys there. So anyone listening, if you feel called, you are so welcome.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. Any other announcements, journal things you'd like to share, comments just before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I guess I'll just say, if you want to connect or kind of follow my work, I'm on social media, Instagram and Facebook. My handle is Medicine Frog Kambo. Um, I'm located generally in Bali, Indonesia, but also sometimes in San Diego, California, and then bounce around. So if you also want to work with me directly, please get in touch and we can always explore that as an option. And then, yeah, Kambo Specialist is my website for all the online courses, and in-person training programs that we offer. Um, and if you're looking for a Kambo practitioner or you are a Kambo practitioner, I also have a free website called kambofinder.com that I'm encouraging everyone to use to locate a practitioner near you, and also to create a listing for free if you're a practitioner and you want to grow your business and be more accessible and visible to your community. So I think that's all for now.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Caitlin. Really appreciate you. Yeah, thank you. Till next time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Thank you for the opportunity and for inviting me to go deep on some weird spirals with you.